Jeremiah. It seems surprising that there are only 3 citations of Qumran evidence in Jeremiah, which is one of the longest books of the OT and a book that differs significantly both in length and chapter arrangement between the MT and the OT versions. In fact, 2 of the 3 textual notes cite an uncertain source, reducing the number of verifiable variants considered in major translations to 1. Whether an accident of history, or lesser Qumran interest in the book than Isaiah, there were only a few copies of Jeremiah found at Qumran, 1 in Cave 2 and, by initial count, 3 in Cave 4, although Tove, 1989, now believes that the original 4QJER actually consists of 3 different manuscripts, see Part 2, p. 72. Because of the relative paucity of material, it is likely that there will be few additional specific Qumran passages cited in translations and revisions of the future. However, the existence at Qumran of Hebrew manuscripts that correspond both to the longer MT text and the shorter OT text demonstrate that both editions were known at a relatively early stage of the transmission of the text. Jeremiah 3:1. The Old Greek text omits the word saying at the beginning of this verse. It seems to be an unnecessary introduction to chapter 3, since both chapters 2 and 3 1-5 are the word of the Lord. The RSV omitted saying on the authority of the Greek evidence, as do the NIB/Reb, and GNB, without any textual note. The NRSV omits saying and cites Qumran evidence. In 3:8 another Qumran variant is reported and followed, rendering she saw, instead of I saw of the MT. In both cases, however, no Qumran manuscript is known to contain chapter 3, Tove 1989:189, 206. Jeremiah 47:5. In a footnote Neb cites the reading of 2QJER rollabout, instead of the MT gash yourselves. The Reb retains gash yourselves in the text and omits the textual note on the Qumran evidence. Other recent translations have not considered this Qumran variant, either. Daniel. The ancient Greek translation of almost the entire Old Testament derives from a version commonly known as the Septuagint and is found in the great Uncial manuscripts, Sinaiticus, Alexandrinus, and Vaticanus. The Book of Daniel is a unique exception. The Greek version of Daniel found in these manuscripts and most printed editions of the Septuagint is derived from a work by Theodotion. His translation of Daniel supplanted the traditional Old Greek version to such an extent that only one manuscript of the Old Greek version remains in existence today. The rest of his translation work was not nearly so successful, although the influence of his work can be seen in the revision of Exodus and Job, as well as in the work of Origen. Actually, little is known about the man Theodotion. Although he probably lived in the 2nd century AD, there is early evidence of Greek translation and revision along the lines followed by Theodotion. This translation activity is sometimes ascribed to Proto-Theodotion or Theodotion. Some of the readings in the Daniel manuscripts from Qumran appear to be an original Hebrew version of the Proto-Theodotion translation. Daniel 7:1-2. The RSV ends 7:1 with the phrase found in the MT, and Daniel told the sum of the matter. Theodotion's Greek version omits the Aramaic word say, but the RSV did not follow this reading on the strength of this Greek witness alone. The NRSV, however, noting that 4QDAN also omits adopts this reading for the text and relegates he said to the footnote. Daniel 8:2. The clause I saw in the vision is repeated in 8:2. The second occurrence appears to be unnecessary, creating a rather cumbersome sentence. In fact, Theodotion has the clause only once. As in the case of Daniel 7:1, the RSV does not depart from the MT. The NRSV finds support for the Theodosianic reading from Qumran evidence, although Ulrich, 1987-34, 1989:16, does not offer this omission as a variant in either 4QDAN or 4QDAN, the only 2 Qumran manuscripts that contain this verse. In 4QDAN BCHZWN in the vision clearly occurs twice. 1QDAN is more fragmentary, but BCHZWN occurs in the second half of the verse, while the first words of the verse are missing in the fragment. The only possibility, although a remote one, based on conjectured line length, is the omission of the first occurrence, but it is the second occurrence that is omitted by the ancient Greek witnesses. Minor prophets. Among the documents found at Qumran are 15 manuscripts that are commentaries on biblical texts, technically called Pesharim. There are commentaries on Psalms, 3 copies, Isaiah, 5, Hosea, 2, Micah, 1, Nahum, 1, Zephaniah, 2, and Habakkuk, 1. There are small fragments of 4 additional manuscripts which some have classified as Pesharim, but evidence is insufficient or completely lacking to prove that they belong in this category of literature. The most famous Pesher, found with the first group of scrolls brought to light from Cave 1, is 1QPHAB. The Cave 4 Pesharim were published by Allegro in DJD5, although the accuracy of his work has been criticized by many scholars. All the Pesharim have been collected in a single volume, complete with transcription of the Hebrew text, English translation, and extensive notes by Horgan, 1979. This remains the most convenient resource for studying the Pesharim Qumran manuscripts. The general format of the Pesharim commentaries is a citation of the biblical text, generally followed by Pishro its interpretation, or a similar phrase. The Hebrew word Pesher occurs only once in the Hebrew Bible in Ecclesiastes 8:1, who knows the interpretation of a thing. RSV. The interpretations offered in the Qumran Pesharim generally deal with the application of the biblical text to the contemporary situation. The Pesharim provide many insights into a type of biblical exegesis practiced in the years surrounding the life of Jesus. The perspective on historical and current events in the life of the community also gives us a perspective on their theological outlook on history. For the purposes of our study of the use of the actual biblical quotations found in the Pesharim, several factors must be kept in mind. First, minor adjustments of the biblical text often occurred so as to adjust it to the syntax of the larger context. Of even greater importance in the evaluation of the value of the Pesharim for textual criticism is the realization that where one textual reading suits a commentator's purpose better than another, he will use it, although he may show in the course of his comment that he is aware of an alternative reading. He has been suspected of deliberately altering the text here and there in order to make the application more pointed, but the suspicion does not amount to proof. Bruce 1959:12. With these cautions in mind, we can turn to the specific passages where translators have utilized the evidence of the Pesharim. Nahum 3:8. In 4qpnah a feminine pronoun suffix, h, is added to the word shell, rampart. The Nib calls attention to this reading in 4qpnah. The Reb has not revised the translation, whose rampart was the Nile, but has dropped the footnote. In fact, most translations render this passage similarly, adding the pronoun which is appropriate to good English style. They were preceded by the ancient versions in making a syntactic adjustment. The question remains whether the 4qpnah scribe was faithfully reproducing a Hebrew text that included the suffix h, or whether he, too, was improving the smoothness of a sentence. Habakkuk 1:8. The MT repeats the Hebrew noun with a pronoun suffix, parashe yuparashe their horsemen, ye their horsemen, RSV. 1qphab omits one letter, yod, in the second occurrence, making it a plural verb. The Nib follows this reading and translates, their cavalry i.e., horsemen spring forward, they spring forward. The Reb, following the same textual variant, renders it more smoothly, their cavalry prance and they gallop. Other translations follow the MT here. Habakkuk 1:17. In 1qphab the Hebrew word chrm, dragnet, in the MT differs by one letter, chrb, sword. In the MT the dragnet metaphor is repeated from verse 16 but seems somewhat out of place in this verse. The 1qphab figure of the sword fits the context of the entire verse, keep on unsheathing his sword, instead of keep on emptying his net, and continually slay nations without pity. The Nib/Reb follows the 1qphab reading, as does the Nab, but without noting such in the collection of textual notes. The GNB also follows 1qphab without a textual note, but this is consistent with their general policy of not footnoting a textual variant that is found in at least one Hebrew manuscript. The NRSV retains the MT without any note, the NJV offers the 1qphab reading in a note. The consensus of modern exegetes and translators is in favor of the 1qphab as superior. Hopp supports this decision as well. Habakkuk 2:1. The NJV offers the 1qphab reading at my post for the MT at the post in a footnote. The only difference between the MT MTSWR and 1qphab MTSWRY is the addition of the pronoun suffix y. This variant is of relatively minor importance, and most translations simply follow the MT here. However, in the same verse, there is a question as to the sequence of dialogue between the prophet and God. Habakkuk has made his complaint and waits at his post for the Lord's reply. The question is whether the last clause of a sentence is a parallel statement, the Lord will say parallel to the expression he will answer, or the next stage in the dialogue, I Habakkuk will answer. Unfortunately, the 1qphab manuscript is missing here. The ancient Syriac translation has he will answer, and this variant is followed by the NRSV, but not RSV, NAB, and GNB. Habakkuk 2:5. The Lord responds to Habakkuk's complaint, the sins of the wicked will not go unpunished. A variety of terms are used throughout chapter 2 to describe the wicked. In the MT 2:5 says, wine is treacherous, Hebrew, hayin. Although drinking is condemned in 2:15, here in 2:5, reference to a person seems more appropriate. 1qphab reads HWN instead of the MT hayin, which can be interpreted as HWN, wealth, Y, NRSV, GNB, or as Hawan defiant/conceited, NJV/Reb. The latter interpretation is supported by some ancient Greek manuscripts. In this passage the more difficult reading Hawan seems best to explain how the other, easier readings could have arisen. Habakkuk 2:15-16. In the last word of verse 15, 1qphab differs from the MT by one letter, Daleth instead of Resh changes the MT Muriham their nakedness to MWDYHM their appointed feasts. Only the Nib/Reb calls attention to this Qumran variant in a note, while translating the MT in the text. However, another variant of 1qphab in verse 16 has been widely accepted by translators. This variant involves the transposition of two consonants, the MTWHRL 1qphab WHRL. The meaning of the MT is obscure, although it probably means be exposed, NIV, or be uncircumcised, RSV, while HRL in 1qphab means stagger. However, although the quotation of the biblical text by the commentator of 1qphab reads stagger, his Pesher comments seem to build on the reading found in the MT, because he says that the shame of the wicked priest was greater than his glory because he did not circumcise the foreskin of his heart but walked in the ways of drunkenness. The Nib/Reb, GNB, NRSV, and NAB all follow the text of 1qphab. The RSV also translates stagger, but bases this rendering on a conjecture.
Conclusion. Our survey of the Dead Sea Scroll biblical manuscripts and their impact on recent Bible translations is more of a preface than a conclusion. It has taken over 40 years for the raw data of the biblical manuscripts from the Dead Sea region study to become available. Because of the fragmentary nature of many of the manuscripts, studies have taken longer than what was first promised. The accumulated evidence of the study of the manuscripts is only now reshaping our understanding of the history of the Old Testament text around the turn of the era. Over 35 years ago, Dewey M. Beagle, 1957, assessed the impact of the Dead Sea Scroll discoveries on Old Testament translation by observing that, even though the manuscript evidence was incomplete, several tentative conclusions could be reached. 1957. Now that nearly all of the biblical manuscripts from Qumran are accessible, the complete picture confirms Beagle's conclusions. 1. The scrolls confirm the reliability of the Masoretic text, thereby adding almost 1,000 years to the antiquity of the Hebrew text. 2. They re-establish the Septuagint as a textual authority. 3. The scrolls are a source of reliable variant readings. The enthusiasm created by the initial discoveries prompted Bible translators to consider changes in the Old Testament text based on the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Revised Standard Version was the first translation to utilize the Qumran evidence. Since then, every major translation has taken into account the evidence of the Dead Sea Scrolls, some offering only occasional notes and others utilizing the evidence quite extensively. All future translations will be able to take advantage of the full range of evidence now available and will be able to give consideration to the textual history of the Old Testament as it is being rewritten by the Qumran finds. Those who anticipated some revolutionary revelations which would require dramatic changes in the Old Testament will be disappointed. The textual evidence of the Dead Sea Scrolls, in fact, confirms the general reliability and stability of the text of the Old Testament as we have it today, while at the same time offers evidence of important early witnesses to textual variants. Even the non-biblical manuscript evidence will play an indirect role in the work of the translators by providing a detailed picture of one Jewish group of the first century, their theology, and their method of biblical interpretation. The next chapter in the history of Bible translation is about to be written.